In this video, we will talk about how to identify nutrient sources. There are multiple ways that one can identify good nutrient sources. We can use food labels, nutrient analysis reports, or food lists from your reading. We will cover these three methods in this video. Carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals are all found in whole and minimally processed foods within all of the food groups. However, the more processed the food, the fewer natural sources of vitamins and minerals there are. Many processing techniques remove or destroy the vitamins and minerals, although synthetic versions of those micronutrients are often added back into the food, as we saw with enriched refined grains earlier in this term. I see two major problems when people evaluate food labels. The first is that when looking at the label, they get way too focused on the macronutrients and never look to see what vitamins and minerals the food provides. Your body doesn't function correctly if it doesn't have all the micronutrients. So we should acknowledge these precious vitamins and minerals in our food. But admittedly, sometimes the labels don't tell the whole story because they are only required to include a handful of vitamins and minerals on the label. So you might not know if a food has other micronutrients like vitamin A, vitamin E, magnesium, or zinc. On the other hand, sometimes manufacturers include all of the micronutrients they added to make the food look better than a less processed version. Remember, the more processed a food is, they often add micronutrients that were lost in processing. Sometimes they add more than required and want to make sure you know about it. It's not necessarily bad. It is just like consuming a vitamin supplement, but we have other problems with processing that have been addressed throughout the term. The other problem I have noticed when people evaluate a food label is they assume a food is not a good choice because it doesn't have a specific vitamin or mineral. But should we expect our foods to have all the micronutrients? For example, when evaluating tuna, like the can on the screen, would you say that it is a poor choice because it has no calcium in it? Should tuna have a good source of calcium? No. Most of your meats and fish are not the highest sources of calcium. We get that mineral more from your dairy and certain vegetables. The truth is that no single food has all of the micronutrients you need. If they did, we would only need to eat one food all day long. Instead, we are supposed to eat a variety of foods from each food group because each of the food groups has varying amounts of micronutrients. That's why I like to refer back to my plate. Each food group contains foods with specific nutrients. So we were just looking at fish, which is in the protein group. Those foods are more likely to have higher amounts of vitamins A, D, E, the B vitamins, iron, zinc, and magnesium. Notice there is no calcium listed. That's because dairy is our main contributor of that mineral. While some of the vegetables have calcium, not enough of them have significant amounts, so it's not really considered one of the primary nutrients for that group. I like to look at food group primary nutrients. It can really help you learn the significant sources for the micronutrients. But even though one group is known to have higher amounts of specific nutrients, each individual food within that group has different amounts of each nutrient. Let's look at the vegetables, for instance. Notice that vegetables contain vitamins C, E, and potassium. If we look at the micronutrients for carrots, notice that it has 70% of what you need daily for vitamin A, but only 4% of what you need for potassium, which, as we've learned previously, is a low amount. But broccoli has a lot more potassium at 13% of what you need in a day, but less vitamin A than the carrots had. So the point is that you need to eat a variety of foods within each food group to obtain all the vitamins and minerals you need. In other words, we don't want you to eat the same one or two vegetables every single day. You should eat a variety of different fruits, vegetables, protein foods, grains, and dairy every day. The percentages that I am pointing out on the labels are the percent daily value. They represent a percent of the total amount for the day. So if you ate one serving of the baby carrots, you will only obtain 4% of what you need for potassium each day. The idea is you should always reach at least 100%. In other words, 100% is the minimum. The percent daily values are only found on nutrition labels. That leads us to discuss how we analyze food labels to determine if the food provides a good amount of a nutrient. In the first part of the term, you learned about the nutrient claims such as high in, good source, low in. If a nutrient has 20% or more of the daily value, that means the nutrient is high in one serving of that food. Whether that's a good or bad thing depends on which nutrient we're talking about. In the graphic of the food label, you can see the red highlighted nutrients that you should limit and the green highlighted nutrients you should get enough of. On the graphic, we see that one serving of this macaroni and cheese has 20% of the daily value for sodium. This means that it is high in sodium. Since we are supposed to limit sodium, having a high amount of sodium is a bad thing. Alternatively, calcium is also 20% daily value, indicating that one serving of macaroni and cheese is high in calcium. This nutrient is in the eat enough group, so having a high amount of calcium is a good thing. Let's apply this to one of the foods that our fictitious case study, Kayla, has eaten. This list before you is one of the days of food that she consumed. Of the foods that she consumed, she ate 6 pieces of breaded fried shrimp. On the right side is a food label for the breaded fried shrimp in the same serving size that she consumed. The first thing that I notice is that the saturated fat is a good source because it has between 10 to 19%. The first thing I notice is that the saturated fat is a good source because one serving of the shrimp has 10 to 19% daily value, actually has 10%. And the sodium is high because it has more than 20% daily value. Both of these nutrients are in the limit category. So the fact that saturated fat is a good source is not a good thing. The sodium is high, which is a bad thing because we should be limiting that nutrient. Then we look at the vitamins and minerals at the bottom of the label, and they are in the eat enough category. These nutrients are all low because they have less than 5% daily value in one serving. Since they are low, we're not eating enough. However, as we talked about before, we would not necessarily expect these nutrients to be high in this particular food. So after looking at her meal, we noticed that her shrimp was high in sodium. But what if we want to know if that is the highest source of sodium she consumed? Then we could look at the reports to see which foods have the most sodium. On the screen, you can see a nutrient breakdown for each food and how much iron, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, and zinc are in each of those foods. This is a graphic very similar to what you will see on the assignment. If we wanted to know the food which contains the highest sodium, we would look at the sodium column and we would look for the highest number. So in this case, we notice that the cheese has the highest amount of sodium per amount that she consumed. But what if we needed to help this individual find some good sources of potassium? Remember that her shrimp was a low source of potassium. So You notice that none of the foods that she consumed are really that high in potassium. So in this case, we may have to find a food list. You should use your readings to identify good sources for your assignment. So let's take a look at how to do that. Okay, so we would go to your modules, and we know that it's potassium, so it's a mineral. Let's scroll down to where the minerals are. So here we are at the minerals. Let's go to your reading, which is right here, the minerals and water reading assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up that lesson and scroll down to potassium. Then we can look at the food sources to see which ones contain a large amount of potassium. And yes, during your assignments, you are allowed to use your module readings to identify food sources. So thank you for staying with me until the end. Have fun on your assignment, but don't forget to watch the last video before you begin.